access to work is split into two parts at the moment, because it's a really big part of your safety module. Falls from height are some of the biggest sort of killers and causes of serious injury in the construction industry, so it's worth spending a decent amount of time to really get to know this part of the subject. So the first part is an introduction to the working at height regulations. And the aims for this part of the session is for you guys to be able to explain what is considered working at height, explain how we can prevent or reduce the risks associated with working at height, and list some checks you would make on a mobile tower scaffold and also on ladders as well. That'll be the next session. Okay, working at heights regs. Now, as I've said, more than half of all the accidents in construction are as a result of falls from height. 46 fatal accidents. It was 15 years ago, but it's the fact of the matter is that was approximately when the working at heights regs were brought in, to try and reduce these. And it has worked to a degree, though, that it is still some of the highest causes of injury in the construction industry. Yeah, essentially, if you remember back to our risk assessment video, we should always start with elimination. And if you can avoid working at height by doing the job another way, then do that. Always start with elimination in your risk assessment protocols. So it specifically states in the working at heights regs that we should avoid working at height where we can. So if you can do the work from ground level, then do it from ground level. If you have to work at height, make sure you use appropriate equipment to stop you falling. These could be guardrails, these could be harnesses. It could be even possibly doing the job from a cherry picker rather than from a ladder or from a scaffold if it's more appropriate. There's lots of different options and lots of different things you should consider before you work at height. As well as having things to prevent you falling, the guardrails, etc. Also set harnesses, airbags, there to catch you, to nets, there in case you fell. And use signage, appropriate signage, to prevent people walking onto things that might be fragile, might create a hazard, a falling hazard. Worth noting, okay, all equipment for working at height must be inspected in its current position at least once every 7 days. It should also be inspected if there's any sort of changes to the environment. For example, if it's been knocked by a piece of plant, which we talked about as an industrial vehicle, or if there's been high winds or sort of inclement weather. It should always be checked immediately after that to make sure that the condition of the equipment hasn't been impacted or changed by the weather or by impact. Hierarchy of controls. I mean, there's a number of things on here you can see that would help prevent falls. We've got guardrails, various guardrails, nets there, like we've talked about, harnesses, but right at the very top, as we've talked about, is try and avoid working at height if you can. Now, what is working at height? This is one of our objectives. Working at height is actually any height at which you could fall and injure yourself, even if it's below ground level. If you're working in an excavation and you could fall, you're below ground level, but it would still be considered working at height, and the working at heights regs would apply in this instance. So mobile tower scaffolds. These are mobile tower scaffolds. Mobile tower scaffolds are scaffolds which have got wheels on them normally. Not always. Sometimes they might have sort of feet on them and they'd be sort of carried into position. But generally speaking, they're going to have wheels. They're normally quite light, made out of aluminium. Quite easy to put up and take down. You're going to do that as part of one of your practical tasks. So we'd always make these checks on a scaffold before use. Check the scaffold isn't near any power lines, okay? For obvious reasons, you know, scaffolds are made out of metal. If it comes into contact with a power line, everyone's in trouble. Check it's on even ground. Like I've said, these things have got wheels on them. If it's sloped or if the ground's soft, then it could. If it was sloped, the scaffold could start to run off down the hill whilst you're on it, which is obviously going to be less than ideal. If it's soft, you could have the ground soft. You could have one or more of the legs going into the ground, and it potentially tipping over and you falling off again. Not something which would be good for yourself. Check the platforms check the whole thing's in good condition. Essentially, you just have a look at the bars, have a look at the platforms, check the platforms aren't warped, aren't damaged, the bars aren't damaged. Just generally check the condition before you climb onto it. Make sure you've also got enough space to work. It's recommended a minimum of 600mm working space on a scaffold. If scaffolds are over 2 meters high, they should have toe boards in place. And I'll quickly show you what these are. Okay, if you look right up on the top here, you can see a silver sort of edge on there. That's a toe board, and that's there to prevent things being kicked off the scaffold and falling onto people who might be working underneath. And check the handrail is the correct height. City and Guilds have asked this recently in their test, so the handrail should be set between 950mm and 1150mm, with the intermediate rail, which is the rail in between the handrail and the floor, roughly about 450mm apart. When you move it, if you move a mobile tower scaffold, make sure that you clear everything off it first. If you start pushing it and there's tools and stuff on there, there's a real chance they might then fall and hit you as you're pushing it, which is not going to be fun. The stability of the tower depends on the ratio of the base to the height. The taller something is, the more unstable it becomes unless you increase the size of the base at the same ratio. And one of the ways you can do that is through outriggers, which we're going to look at pretty soon. But you should always check the manufacturer's information before you build a scaffold. And you'd find the maximum height in the manufacturer's literature. Okay. Outriggers are these things here, and they increase the base area essentially and allow you to build that a little bit higher. But as I've said, always make sure you read the manufacturer's literature before you put it together. Okay. Worth noting, make sure if you do use outriggers, make sure they're clearly marked, put hazard warning tape on them so people aren't going to trip over them. And the ladders, access in a mobile scaffold should always be done on the inside. Because they're moderately light, they're quite light scaffolds, if a person climbs up the outside, especially if they're carrying like tools and equipment, there's a real chance they could actually pull the thing over, it could tip over, land on top of them, land on top of other people. So the access, whenever you access a scaffold, always access it through the middle. Even if you see a ladder on the scaffold, you should always go inside the scaffold and climb up the ladder on the inside. Okay, like you can see just here. Yeah, don't lean the ladder against the tower scaffold because it might push it over. Okay. As I've said, scaffold should be inspected by a competent person at least every 7 days, and on it there would be some what we call scaff tags. Look a bit like this, a wee green tag with a date on it of when it was last inspected and when it's to be inspected again. Alrighty, so fixed position scaffolds, a lot of the same information applies really for fixed position scaffolds. Fixed position scaffolds are scaffolds which can't easily be moved. You'd need a scaffolder really to move them, a professional scaffolder. And again, you should always visually inspect them before use. And it's a lot of the same things that apply to the mobile scaffold also apply to the fixed position scaffold. So yeah, like the fixed position, like the mobile, should be checked in its current position at least once every 7 days. It should have scaff tags. There's two different types of fixed position scaffolds that we need to know about. These are an independent scaffold and a put log scaffold. A put log scaffold essentially has a put log which is fixed into the wall. Okay. A put log scaffold could have a minimum of 2 rising bars with sort of put logs fixed into the walls. Essentially, the wall acts as the support for the other side of the scaffold, whereas an independent scaffold would have to have at least 4 legs and it could stand independently of the wall. Essentially, with an independent scaffold, you could build before you start building the wall, whereas a put log scaffold, you have to have the wall already in place before you can install that type. So as you can see, the put logs driven into the wall, and the wall acts as one side of the support of the scaffold. Whereas an independent scaffold, you can see, stands completely independently on sort of 4 or more legs. Okay. So the aims of this session, which you guys hopefully should have been able to do now and you'll be tested on, are to be able to explain what is considered working at height, explain how we can prevent or reduce the risks associated with working at height, and list some checks you would make on a mobile tower scaffold and also an independent scaffold as well. Okay, good luck.